Good evening and welcome to tonight's program with our special partner, NASA. Tonight's subject is NASA ocean satellites, supercomputers, and climate science. I'm Lisa Hoover, Programs Manager at Chabot, and we're thrilled to bring you yet another exciting virtual program direct to your homes this evening. Our guest speaker this evening is Dr. Dimitris Menemenlis, a research scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory at the California Institute of Technology. Working with the Estimating the Circulation and Climate of the Ocean, or ECCO, Dr. Menemenlis, oops, missed that up there, and colleagues attempt to make the best possible estimates of ocean circulation and use these to investigate ocean interactions with sea ice, land ice, atmosphere, coastal processes, and biogeochemical cycles. Recently, he's worked with visualization experts at NASA's Ames Research Center here in the South Bay to release a new database that allows a broader community of researchers to explore hundreds of videos and images pre-computed from the ECCO's simulation run on NASA supercomputers. The pre-computerized computed visualizations require much less effort to view, and that's a great benefit of this new process. If you have questions during our presentation tonight, put them in the chat. We'll queue them up and give them to Dr. Menemenlis at the end. So please do so either from Facebook or to YouTube. We'll gather them and take as many as we can, time permitting. If you'd like to make a donation during our program, you can do so via the red donation feature on Facebook or anytime from our website. We want to do a special shout out and thanks to NASA for making this event possible. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our guest tonight, Dr. Menemenlis. Welcome.
Hi, so I should share my screen now. Can you see my presentation now?
Yes. Looks perfect.
Okay, good. So I'm a satellite oceanographer who works for NASA at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory of the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena. And I use satellite observations and supercomputers to study ocean circulation and its role in the Earth's climate system. I'm really excited by this opportunity to tell you a little bit about the work that I do at Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So let's see if I can move this. Oh, yeah. So one of the reasons that we study ocean circulation is to better understand the impact of human activity on the Earth's climate. For example, this curve, which many of you may have seen already, it's an estimate of atmospheric carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And initially, it's obtained from ice core data. And then later, when you start seeing the darker line, seasonal cycle, that's from Mauna Loa flask observations in Hawaii. And since the beginning of the industrial era, the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration has almost doubled from 275 parts per million in 1760 to 440 parts per million last month. The animation to the left shows the temporal evolution of carbon accumulation in active reservoirs. Positive numbers are sources of carbon and negative values are sinks. So initially, can you see my mouse when I move it here? Well, anyways.
Yes, we can. Mm-hmm.
Good, perfect. So initially, you can see that the largest source of carbon is land use changes and fires. That's this green line here. But later on, the fossil fuels, so gasoline, coal, takes over. So since around the 1950s, it has become the largest source of carbon that we emit in the atmosphere. So these sources of carbon are balanced by sinks. So one of the places where this extra carbon goes is in the atmosphere. So it's this red line here. So this is what the sink of carbon is what's increasing, what increased the atmospheric carbon dioxide from 275 to 440 parts per million. Another major sink is the ocean, this blue line here. And also in recent decades, the land itself has become a sink as forests grow back or reabsorb some of this fossil fuel carbon. Now, the ocean is a huge reservoir of carbon, as you can see here. It contains approximately 95% of the active carbon. And it is estimated that so far it has absorbed about 1/3 to 1/2 of the anthropogenic emissions of carbon since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And if things don't change, at steady state, the ocean is expected to eventually absorb most of the carbon that we emit to the atmosphere. But the key question is one of timescale. How quickly will this carbon dioxide be absorbed by the ocean? So small changes in the rate at which air-sea carbon dioxide is exchanged between the ocean and the atmosphere can have very large consequences on the peak atmospheric CO2 concentration. So that's one of the reasons why we study and try to understand air-sea exchange, the transport, and the storage of carbon by the ocean. So one of the consequences of atmospheric carbon dioxide increase is that surface air temperature has been increasing. And this curve here is kind of equivalent to what we were showing for carbon dioxide, but now it shows surface air temperature. And you can see that since the 1960s, there's been a quite dramatic increase in the global mean surface air temperature by almost a degree Celsius, which is about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So again, the ocean plays a key role in mitigating the impact of global heating. As for carbon dioxide, the ocean is a huge reservoir of heat, and it's estimated to have absorbed more than 90% of the excess heat since the Industrial Revolution. Without the ocean's ability to store and redistribute heat, our planet would experience extreme temperatures, which would make life very difficult. So this plot here, what it shows is where that extra heat has gone since the 1960s. And these two reservoirs here, this is the upper ocean and this is the deep ocean. And you can see that most of the heat, the extra heat that has been generated because of this increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the greenhouse warming as they call it, has actually gone to the ocean, and only very little has remained in the atmosphere. This is this little blip here, the land, and also changing ice conditions, melting ice. So without the ocean, the warming would have been catastrophic, right, compared to what we've experienced. So we're very lucky to have the ocean to both absorb carbon dioxide and also absorb this excess heat that has been caused by the increase in carbon dioxide. I'm not going to discuss this because it's a little technical. So, however, studying the ocean is complicated. there is a zoo of strongly coupled physical ocean processes on a wide range of spatial and temporal scales, from millimeters to global, and from tenth of a second to thousandths of years. So this diagram here is called a Stomal diagram after a very famous oceanographer from the last century. And what he did is he categorized different processes, different things that happen in the ocean as a function of scale. So this goes from millimeters to hundreds, tens of thousands of kilometers. And this is, in terms of time scale, goes from a tenth of a second to 10,000 years. So you can see that there is a very large number of different processes that they're all kind of overlapping and interacting with each other. And this, this is a figure that shows some of these things that happen. There's lots of things that happen here near the surface that impact the exchange of properties with the atmosphere. But then once these properties are absorbed at depth, there's a lot of complicated and interesting processes that occur below below the surface. So we actually, you don't need to know what these equations are, but just to show you that this is really what we actually know about how the ocean behaves. These equations, they're called the Navier-Stokes equations. They prescribe how the ocean evolves, but we can't solve, we can't do anything useful with these in our heads, right? The ocean is just way too complicated to just understand it just with these equations. What we need to do is to create numerical models that use these equations to tell us how the ocean is evolving. And there was this person called L.F. Richardson 100 years ago who envisioned the operation or the usefulness of numerical models for carrying out this type of study. So he wrote this book in 1922, and this sentence is taken from that book. It's from the preface of the book, and it says, "Perhaps someday in the dim future, it will be possible to advance the computations faster than the weather advances and at a cost less than the saving to mankind due to the information gain. But that is a dream." I mean, what he had envisioned and described in that book is, imagine that you have a room that has the shape of a sphere, and that's broken down in little squares. And behind each little square, you can see there's a box, and there's a bunch of people inside that are actually computing things for that square, right? I don't know if you can see the people in these boxes. And then there's some person here that sits in the middle, and he calls out to every box, and he says, "Okay, what did you find?" So they're basically solving these equations, discretized forms of the equations that I showed on the previous page. And then they shout back their answer to this person here, and he relays it down, to this control room, if you like. So this was kind of a fanciful idea of, if you were able to carry out these computations for each, you would be able to solve these equations. Well, these are for the oceans, but similar ones for the atmosphere, and end up doing numerical weather prediction. But there was in 1922, there were no computers, no numerical electronic computers. So this was a very fanciful idea. And he does say, but that is a dream. It's amazing, actually, that he predicted this 100 years before. Well, 60 years before it became possible and 100 years before today, right? So, but this is actually what we do today. We take the globe and we break it up into little squares or little rectangles, and these are various ways that we use to break down the globe into into small regions. And then we solve these equations for each one of these little square, little rectangles. And there's, you know, these are some of the variables that we carry. So for example, for the ocean, we carry temperature, pressure, velocity, and there's different ways of doing this computation. You can position all these variables at the same location, or you can position them at the corners or at the edges. Those are just details, but the main idea is exactly what he had described 100 years ago in this very famous book. And we do the same thing in the vertical. We break it down into small rectangles or squares. And again, that's called discretizing the ocean. And then we solve these equations numerically. So if you do that, what does it look like? So this is one of the highest resolution coupled ocean atmosphere simulations that's run at the NASA Ames Research Center in Silicon Valley on a very big supercomputer, tens of thousands of processors working on little sections of ocean and little sections of atmosphere. And what's visualized here is it's surface quantities, but these are fully three-dimensional simulations that go to the bottom of the ocean and to the top of the atmosphere. But here, what's being visualized is the wind at the surface of the ocean. So these would be storms, and this would be wind speed or wind stress that's driving the ocean. And below that, these purple wiggles are is the ocean circulation. So those are the ocean mesoscale eddies. And you can see some of the major currents like the Kuroshio and the Gulf Stream, Antarctic circumpolar current. So this dream, this dream here, perhaps someday in the dim future, but this is a dream. Well, today we're able to do it and are getting increasingly more realistic representations of what the ocean and the atmosphere is doing. Same thing for sea ice. We have equations that describe the behavior of sea ice. And this is shows a simulation of sea ice in the Arctic Ocean. And you have the shading shows the concentration, and the shadowing shows the thickness. And you can see that as you do, if you look at the sea ice from satellites, you have these cracks that are formed that are called leads. And then you have the circulation of ice where you have ice kind of coming out here next to Greenland, coming out of the Arctic Ocean. And we can, this way we can, and here you see the melting of the ice as the summer arrives. This is July, and then August. You can see that there's a seasonal cycle, but we're able to capture in a simulation, in a numerical simulation, something that behaves very realistically, like what is observed by satellites and other instruments. Okay, so now the next topic I want to talk is where do NASA observations come in? Well, in terms of the ocean, we can have ships, or we can have what's called floats that just go through the ocean and measure at a point. And these observations are basically the closest to ocean truth. I mean, that is the ocean. We are touching it. We are measuring its temperature, its salinity, its velocity. But the ocean is huge, and these point measurements have a very limited spatial and temporal coverage. They're point measurements in time and in space, and therefore they're not necessarily representative of large scales or long period averages. They are going to be contaminated by several sources of noise. Some of it is geophysical. Geophysical is things that are actually happening in the ocean, but that are not the processes that we're trying to measure. That's what geophysical noise is. And instrument noise, well, electronics and, there can be errors and noise and mistakes. This is a possibility of aliasing. This is a technical term for saying that if you're not measuring something frequently enough, you can be fooled into thinking that a high, something that's high frequency or that's small scale, that it actually might look like a low frequency or a large scale signal. This is a concept that comes from discretization. It's called aliasing. More recently, since the 80s, we have satellite observations. And the nice thing about satellite observations of the ocean or the atmosphere is they give you global coverage. However, you're not touching the ocean. They're indirect observations of a small number of oceanographic variables, right? You're limited to near surface because the ocean is opaque to electromagnetic radiation, or to depth integrated observables, for example, sea surface height or the mass of the ocean, right? Those are depth integrated. And then you have errors that are due, for example, to atmospheric variability. Instead of the ocean changing, it's things that happen in the path between the satellite and the ocean. And also these algorithms that we use to, to extract, to understand these observations can have errors. And there are sampling issues because of the footprint size, or because the satellite isn't observing everywhere at all times. It's circling the Earth and has. So observing the ocean is like blind men observing an elephant, right? Depending on where you touch, you think it's something else. You touch the ear and you think it's a fan. You touch the tusk, you think it's a spear. You touch the trunk, maybe it's a snake. You touch the leg, maybe it's a tree, a wall, a rope. So how do we put all these observations together? Well, the way that we do that is by using numerical simulations. And the nice thing about numerical simulations, they're a complete space-time description of the ocean and the atmosphere. However, they're not perfect. They contain errors for various reasons. These errors have to do with discretization, the fact that we have to break it down into small rectangles or cubes can cause errors. It has to do with processes that happen at scale smaller than your rectangles. So those are called subgrid scale parametrization errors. And it has to do with boundary conditions. How do you initialize these things? How do you drive? For example, if it's an ocean simulation, how do you apply an atmospheric forcing on top? So those are boundary condition errors. So how can we get a description of the global ocean circulation that is as complete and as close to truth as possible? Well, we can observe the ocean circulation using satellite and in situ instruments. We can construct numerical ocean models based on these equations that I showed at the very beginning, and on parametrizations or representations of processes that happen at scales that aren't resolved. And then we can use the observations to improve the numerical ocean circulation model and to adjust the empirical parameters and the boundary conditions. Once we have that, we can make practical and scientific predictions And then we can go and acquire new observations to evaluate and also then to further adjust these model predictions and turn the crank again, make the models better. So this is a little bit what it looks like. This is one of the key projects that I work on is called Estimating the Circulation and Climate of the Ocean. And we basically use all these satellite observations of the ocean. So sea surface height, salinity, sea ice, temperature, and gravity, and all the all the global scale available in situ observations. So these profiling floats, ship observations, and we also use, for example, there is marine mammals that carry instruments and make observations when they dive, and moored instruments. And we put all that together with numerical ocean models, and we get the best possible estimate of what ocean circulation is doing. How do we use that? Well, in many ways. Here's one example that comes back to the problem that I showed in my introductory slide. This is our attempt to try to understand the CO2 flux from the atmosphere to the ocean. And this is, so we can take this ocean circulation model and we can add biology and chemistry. And then we can have, that provides us with estimates of, in this case, this is the flux of carbon dioxide at the surface, with red meaning that carbon dioxide is coming out of the ocean, blue that it is being absorbed. I'm going to replay it. So you can see at the equator, there's waters coming up, upwelling. So carbon-rich waters exhale carbon to the atmosphere. And then at mid-latitudes, you have this absorption, especially during winter months when the water is colder, just like a bottle of soda pop in the fridge. When it's colder, the carbon dioxide is more absorbed, but in the summer, it, if you heat up the Coke, the carbon dioxide comes out. But more than just this net value, we can also find the causes. We can say if it's caused by biology, by fresh water, by heat, or by physics. So I'm going to stop here, a very brief summary, and then take questions. So what I've discussed is, I've discussed components of an ocean general circulation model. So we have these equations that describe how the ocean moves, how it interacts. And these equations, so the motion, conservation, meaning that you can't create or destroy water. It has to, if you have it, you have it. State how the density of the water is related to temperature and salinity. And then we have various ways of discretizing these equations spatially and vertically, and then applying boundary conditions. So that's kind of how we construct an ocean and also an atmospheric general circulation model. I also discussed how we combine observations and models together. So at NASA, we have these beautiful satellite observations of the ocean, and we combine them with very advanced numerical simulations. And by putting the two together, we're able to figure out that it's an elephant, and it's not a wall or a rope or a spear, but it's an elephant. And then once we have this description of the time evolving ocean circulation, we can apply it to large number of climate applications. And the example that I showed you is for ocean ecology and biogeochemistry, which it allows us to understand the impact of human activity on increasing carbon dioxide and how how the ocean will respond to this perturbation. So I'm going to stop here, take questions.
Thank you so much. That was really informative, and we welcome your questions from the audience. While we're waiting, I imagine that this information that you're collecting through these models would be able to inform us of the state of CO2 emissions on the ocean. How will that trickle down to informing our daily lives?
So for example, there's a lot of discussion about taking steps to reduce this, this exponential increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And so one of the ways is, various countries have pledged to take various actions to try to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. Well, these kinds of models can help us to, monitor and make sure that we're on track to achieve these objectives. That's one way. Now, more specifically, in terms of the ocean biogeochemical simulations that we're running, there are some ideas about how the ocean could be used to mitigate the increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. As I showed you, that the ocean is like a huge reservoir, both of active carbon and of heat, and therefore, and there's steps we can take. Some of them are drastic, like geoengineering, but some of them are just changing the way that we, so for example, what we do in coastal regions, how we protect coastal environments, mangroves, algae, and these could have an impact on reabsorbing some of that carbon dioxide that we are pumping in the atmosphere. So, and then we're also working with groups that have ideas like, if you actually could speed up the absorption of carbon dioxide by the ocean. We know that eventually most of the carbon dioxide we're putting in the atmosphere will end up in the ocean. There are some ideas about how one might possibly speed up this reabsorption. But of course, you don't want to, it'd be too risky to run this experiment in real, and expensive to run it in real life. So what you do is you try to experiment numerically first, and we call it in silico. So just because it's done on silicon chips. But so that those are some of the ways that one can use these solutions.
These supercomputers that are doing this work, how do they compare to one's average home computer? What are they really computing?
So for example, the supercomputer at NASA Ames has hundreds of thousands of cores. So let's say your laptop may have one central processing unit with 8 to 16 cores. Well, the supercomputers have the NASA Ames supercomputer has hundreds of thousands of cores, so it's hundreds of thousands of times faster than your laptop, if you like. And the idea is that just as L.F. Richardson had envisioned, where he would have a bunch of people working on a small region of the planet. Well, we do that, but now instead of people working, doing the calculation and shouting back the results to someone in the center who collects that information, well, we let those cores, the CPUs, do these computations for us, and we do it in what's called in parallel, meaning that we break down the ocean or the atmosphere into small regions, and each core will work on a specific region and then communicate that information back to to a central place that collects all that information and makes it useful for us to look at.
Nice. What have you discovered through the visualizations you explore in the nice hyperwall?
So what, one of these simulations, they create a lot of numbers, way more than any person can possibly analyze, and having these the hyperwall is a very big wall of many computer screens that can do very real-time analysis of these simulations, and you can so you're able, there's many ways of using the hyperwall, but one way is at its simplest form, you can have a global view if you go far away, but then as you approach a specific screen, you can look at the detail of your simulation. These simulations we're carrying have a lot more pixels than your computer screen has. So what you were seeing, the animation I showed, for example, you were seeing maybe 1 in 10 pixels, or maybe even less. I'd have to do the computation depending on the resolution of your screen, but you're definitely not seeing all the detail. There's a lot more detail. So if you're able to, if you have a hyperwall, you can look at this global picture, just like the one I showed, but then you can zoom in and go and look at the detail of what is happening. So it allows us to better understand, or at least initially to have a better understanding of what the physical processes that are being simulated. And then we, once we have a preliminary idea of these processes, then we can go and do more thorough analysis. Is that too technical? Or it makes sense what I said.
Yes. Another question for you. Do you ever use people power, fishing boats, shipping containers,
Yes.
oil rigs, etc., to collect data in the ocean? Or do you mostly rely on satellites?
No, we rely on both. Well, I myself, I just sit in front of a computer and use the data that has been collected. I've had once in a while, I've had the chance to go out on oceanographic cruises and actually collect some data. It's really fun, but most of the time what I do is I sit in front of a computer and collect and put all that data together. But the satellite observations are a fantastic way to get a global view of things. but they are a very restricted set of variables. So for example, they do not, electromagnetic radiation cannot penetrate very far into the ocean. And therefore, you will either see surface variables or you will see depth integrated variables, right? So so in order to, and the other thing is that satellite observations, you have to go through all these algorithms to try to convert what it is you're seeing and remove all the errors in order to get a oceanographically useful signal. So it's incredibly important to also have what we call in situ observations, like the one that you just described, people power, or ships, and lowering instruments in the water and seeing profiles of temperature and salinity. But now recently, in addition to people power, ships, and there's also these automated in situ observatories. Some of them are these profiling floats, which, for example, there's a network of profiling floats called Argo, which they live at about 1 kilometer depth in the ocean. And then once every 10 days or so, they will go down to 2 kilometers depth, then come all the way up to the surface. And when they do that, they take a profile of the temperature and the salinity. And when they reach the surface, they communicate that to a satellite, and then that's sent back to us. So those are in situ observations. There's other things called sail drones. They're little sailboats, really, that are automated and can obtain all sorts of cool observations near the surface of the ocean. In addition to people power, we also use marine mammal power. We instrument marine mammals. They glue an instrument on their head and then wherever these marine mammals go, they actually send some information back to us about the conditions of the ocean. So those are also really useful, important observations. So yes, the answer is yes.
Who knew?
Yeah.
I didn't think about the marine life. Here's another question. Does NASA or JPL have research groups dedicated to developing methods for downscaling their climate model projections into smaller regional scales?
Absolutely. What a great question. Yeah, in addition to these global simulations, we carry out a whole bunch of regional simulations for many different reasons. I mean, one of the reasons is we want to understand the region better, and you cannot. If you remember the one slide that I showed early on that was showing these various spatial scales of ocean circulation, well, a global simulation, no matter how big your computer is, at least today and in my lifetime and maybe my children's lifetime, you can't resolve all the scales. You'd have, right now, the biggest global simulations that we run, like the one that I showed, have horizontal grid cells size that are about 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, right? That's the best we can do globally, believe it or not. And yet, really, these equations that I showed on one of the slides, they're supposed to apply to a centimeter of water, right? So between a centimeter and a kilometer, there's a huge range of scales that we're not actually resolving. And if we need to resolve these, we need to go to, the way to do it is to go to a small regional scale simulation. We do that, for example, to understand the interaction of ice sheets with the ocean, where some of very small scale processes are responsible, or to understand mixing in near bathymetric features, or to understand the impact of river runoff or coastal regions. So there is a lot of reasons why we do regional studies. And then at the same time, we can also improve the model in regional studies. And then whatever we learned in those regional, more detailed studies, we can put them back in the global simulation and get better global estimates. So yes, definitely, we do that all the time.
Awesome. Another question for you. Have studies been able to show that the stability of the computed simulation result if the mesh or resolution size is refined to smaller length scales in the ocean? For example, going from a data grid size, say, 10 kilometers to 2.
My God, what an amazing question. You know, this is, in most fields of fluid dynamics, people do that, which is these convergence studies, which you keep making the scale smaller and smaller until the solution doesn't change anymore, right? But as I said, we can't do that now. You know, maybe our great grandchildren. Well, I don't know how many generations, but to get to this convergence that you're talking about globally, we're several generations away in terms of compute power. So, however, this is done in small regional domains for fluid dynamic systems. There's something called LES simulations. So they're large eddy simulations. That's one of, and there you do that. You kind of keep decreasing the mesh size until your solution has converged. Having said that, you know, there's some cruder measures of convergence, and we do. So this would not be exact numerical convergence, but some cruder measure of convergence in terms of important things. So, for example, a study I was involved with, which we just wrote, we were interested. So in the ocean, there's what's called mesoscale eddies, and those are of order 100 kilometers. And then there's, and greater. And then there's some mesoscale eddies, which is things that are, let's say, 50 kilometers or less, or, you know, 1-2 kilometers front. And we were interested in, and we can run simulations, global simulations with mesoscale eddies. We can't run them long enough to really to converge, right? No, sorry. We can run with mesoscale eddies, we can run them to convergence, but with some mesoscale eddies, we can't, because that becomes too expensive. So we did a regional study where we tried to increase the resolution in steps to see the impact of some mesoscale eddies on a specific feature of the circulation, which is the stratification of the North Atlantic. And we did not expect this, but to our surprise, for that particular aspect of the circulation, after you resolve mesoscale eddies quite well, let's say you were at a you know, beyond a tenth of a degree, so 10-kilometer grid cells or smaller, the solution stopped changing in major ways, right? So it's not quite the kind of convergence that you might have in mind, but yeah, but we do these types of studies. Maybe that's more. Yes, the answer is yes to some extent, but not not to full convergence yet. That's just not possible.
Wow. How have all of these advancements in technologies changed the way we do earth science research over the years?
Yeah, I mean, well, can you imagine that 100 years ago, this was just kind of a fanciful dream with this room full of people? I think that, I, this change has happened relatively, relatively suddenly in my lifetime. And when I look at what we're able to do today compared to what I was able to do when I was starting my career, I just can't wait to see what the next generation of people will do. And I think these tools, I will be very useful. I mean, we have, there's this concept that, at a certain scale and degree, and it probably has already happened. We're not on a planet anymore. We are on a spaceship, right? We are. There's so many of us, and this is a good thing. I mean, I believe in when there's so many of us who are trying to share one planet, then we can't just go around and doing. We can't just rely on natural systems for sustaining life on the planet, and therefore, once you have a spaceship, you need to fully understand, the consequence. At the very least, you need to understand what's happening, the consequences predict, like weather, droughts, storms, heating, and these things. So these types of numerical simulations and observations, they go hand in hand. One is not useful without the other. You need both the observations and the simulations. They will allow us to better understand, better manage, the resources of the planet. Mm-hmm. And also, I mean, the other thing is that if we want to do something, if we want to take some action, and I will give a specific example, which is kind of interesting actually. That if you want to take some action to change the weather or the climate or isn't it better to be able to do it in simulation, first of all, to ask questions, if I do this, what happens? If I do that, what happens? And that, even though it might not be 100% the truth, because simulations have errors, at least you've done the best you can to try to predict the consequences of, planting a tree in one location as opposed to another location. And literally, apparently, I've heard that in Israel, I have a friend was telling me that they have they do some local weather changes by asking people, okay, now you go out and turn on, I don't know exactly how it works, but I think it's a mirror or what have you. And if everybody does it in a certain way, then they can actually have an impact on local weather, get rain or what have you. I'd love to, this is hearsay from a friend, and I would love to read up about it. But these kinds of things should be possible, right? Where you it helps you to make better decisions about some of the actions that you take.
Right, just the way, we all stayed at home for a year and we saw a difference. So yes. What can citizens do to reduce emissions that impact the ocean?
So one of the very big problems of the ocean is a lot of, first of all, overexploitation, so overfishing, but then also pollution in terms of plastics and and heavy metals and other things. So I would say, I mean, I always say that, like, I think the most important thing you can do is to stay informed and to vote and to vote and to because that, you know, that's how I think that's one way you can have an impact, is if you try to stay informed and are careful where you get your news sources, and then you hold the people that you vote for accountable, and and don't let them lie to you, and so I think that's one way you can make a difference. I mean, I guess when I was younger, I also thought of being, more active ways of going out and, protesting and all that. And that's really important too. But, at some point, I think that if everybody in society, in the democratic society, has more and better information and stays informed,
Sure, we make all better decisions together.
Yeah, you make better decisions. So stay informed, keep curious.
What's next for the ECCO?
Oh, well, we keep pushing in many different directions. So we want to be higher resolution so we can have more detail. And then we have all these applications where we couple with sea ice, with land ice. Land ice are ice sheets that flow into the ocean from Antarctica or Greenland. And to me, like, one of the most exciting one is kind of this application that I showed, how we can use ocean circulation to study ocean biology and biogeochemistry, and in particular the impact on the carbon cycle of the ocean, and also to study mitigation or active reductions of carbon using the ocean. So to me, those are incredibly useful applications. So they're and of course, the other thing is, being NASA, we also like to figure out, can we design better satellite missions that will give us even more information? Because the models go hand in hand with observations. The better the observations, the better the models, and vice versa. The better the models, the better you can use the observations. So.
Wow. Well, this has been thrilling. I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience has. We're coming up to the top of the hour, so I think our time is up. But I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight, and hopefully it won't be the last time, and hopefully we'll get to see you on site in the real world in the future.
I'd love to. I'd love to look through one of these telescopes someday.
Thanks again. Thank you, NASA, for putting this together for us. And those of you who are still watching, don't forget, you can always tune in every weekend. We have something going on, our live telescope viewing, our Sky This Month program with our East Bay Astronomical Society, and so much more. Thank you for joining us, and good night, everyone.
Good night.
And Haley, are we off stream?
Yes, I just ended our stream.